She went through all of her mom's paperwork and eventually found something that she thought was a birth certificate. She brought it into the insurance agency. They informed her that the birth certificate was a fake. This is Joy White, and in 1987, she was 16 years old, and she found out that she was pregnant by her boyfriend at the time, Carl Tyson, who was 22 years old. This was very unexpected for her. She was very young, very scared. Her mother, though, was supportive of her, and she started getting really excited to be a mom. On July 15th, 1987, Joy gave birth to a baby girl named Carlina White at Harlem Hospital in New York. Joy was so excited to have this new baby girl. She brought her home to her mother's house in Harlem. But weeks later, on August 4th, she realized that Carlina had a really high fever, 104. The doctors figured out that she had swallowed some fluid during birth and she had an infection. And doctors told Joy and Carl that you're gonna have to leave your baby here overnight, and we're not sure how long she'll be here. I mean, they had to clear this infection. Because she couldn't bring her home and she was so young and probably so emotional, Joy ended up crying. She was crying out in the hospital hallway, and that's when some random woman in white came up to her and comforted her. She was telling her everything was gonna be okay, and it made her feel a lot better. But shortly after she got home, some detectives came to her house. Joy's mom actually answered the door, and at first she thought that Carlina had died and they were coming to tell her, but they actually had even worse news. Carlina had been taken, abducted, out of the hospital. So obviously Joy and Carl are freaking out. They thought they were perfectly fine to leave their baby in a hospital. Like, you'd think a hospital is a safe place. People are gonna be watching her. How could anything like that happen? When they got to the hospital, there was tons of like sniffing dogs, detectives, helicopters, like whole 9 yards. And they had a big meeting with the whole hospital staff. And none of the hospital staff remembered anything sketchy happening. None of them saw anything. But it wasn't long before Joy started to think maybe that woman that came up to me that looked like a nurse because she was wearing all white was the person who abducted my baby. And other witnesses had said they saw this same woman just like hanging out in the pediatric section several different times. But no one ever said anything because they thought she was a parent or a volunteer, someone who needed to be there, because like, who just hangs out at the hospital? Once they started to put the pieces together, Joy and the investigators and Carl all believed that that woman probably stole Carlina. So they decided to create a sketch of her and put it around the hospital, but her family was just terrified. I mean, wouldn't you? You have no idea where your baby is. Like, especially a new mom like this, she just carried this baby for 9 months, and then someone just takes it from you, and you have no care over it. You have no idea even where they are. I mean, I cannot even picture what this would be like how scared you'd be and nervous. And they never got any leads. They got like 50 calls, people coming up with random things saying they saw her, but nothing ever played out. No one ever actually tracked her down. But Joy's main concern was finding her daughter. She wanted to have as much media coverage as possible. She felt like making people aware that her baby was missing was the best thing that she could do, so she did as many interviews and as much media as she could. So Joy and Carl actually sued the Harlem Hospital. They basically made the argument that there wasn't nearly enough security at the hospital, and that if there was, this wouldn't have happened. In 1992, they settled for $720,000, which doesn't seem like enough to me for losing a baby. But her parents had a feeling that she would come back. So they actually put the money in a bank account for her so that when she was over the age of 21, if she had come back, she could access that. Joy and Carl ended up splitting up after the disappearance of Carlina. I'm sure this took an incredible toll on their relationship. And over the years, the case just turned cold. And the only real hope they had was keeping her name alive with the sketches that they were coming out with. But all they had was a baby picture. Like, they didn't have anything to kind of age progress what she would look like now. But even though there were no leads, Joy did not give up. So this is Ann Pedway. She lived in Bridgeport, but she hadn't been there in months. Her friends and family said that she just left. And before she left, her family was under the impression that she was pregnant. So when she came back, she had a baby with her, and they figured she had just given birth. And like we talked about earlier, a lot of women who abduct babies are trying to keep a man in their life, and Ann was definitely trying to do that. She was trying to stay with a man named Derek Nance, and he was actually a local dealer. She actually had an arrest record, and these were all charges for and theft. But she showed up with this baby and she named her Nedra, Nettie for short. And Carlina was an entertainer. She had a real spirit to her. She would perform at family events. She always wanted to be a star one day. But she was also a kid that kind of liked to keep to herself. She wrote poetry. She kind of internalized a lot of her feelings. She didn't have a father in her life and she believed that Anne was her mother. I feel like she had a lot of like inner turmoil that she didn't know why. So she was dealing with a lot of that by artistically expressing herself. And Carlina actually spent a lot of time with her grandmother. She lived closer to the school district she wanted to be a part of, and she just preferred to live with her. So she spent a lot of her life with her. And in 2005, Carlina found out that she was pregnant with a baby of her own. Her and her boyfriend were in a really serious relationship, so they were just over the moon about having a baby. And she actually didn't have health insurance at the time, so she needed to have her documents in order to get health insurance. So she asked her mom for her birth certificate and her social security card, and Anne said that she would get them to her, but she was taking a really long time to do it. So Carlina, or Nedra, decided to try to get this information on her own. She went through all of her mom's paperwork and eventually found something that she thought was a birth certificate, and so she brought it into the insurance agency, but when she got there, they informed her that the birth certificate was a fake. Can you imagine how you would feel finding that out? So obviously she was just confused. Why would her mother have a fake birth certificate for her? It shocked her whole family, but they felt like she was part of them anyway. They decided that it didn't even matter. So the Connecticut Department of Children and Families, or DCF, opened Carlina's case. They took DNA samples and were able to confirm that she was not Anne's child. However, they did pretty much nothing to help her find her actual mother. And Anne was not helpful either. She said that she was born in New Haven, but they had no record of her birth. And so Carlina kind of felt like she had no choice but to just move on with her life and let it go. But it always bothered her. On May 6th of 2005, when she was 17 years old, she gave birth to her daughter, who was named Somani, and she was just so thrilled to have someone that she knew was her blood family, because now she doesn't know anyone who's related to her. But she decided that she wanted to keep a relationship with Anne, even though she knew that she wasn't her real mother and had been lying to her whole life. In 2009, she moved really close to Atlanta, and she was working as an assistant in a hair salon. And at this point, she was actually still trying to look on the internet, see if there was, any sign of her mother out there. This is when social media was starting to really get popular and stuff. Maybe she could connect with her that way. One day when she was doing an online search, she actually came across a picture of a baby that she thought looked really similar to her. This baby was born around the same time and in a similar geographical area to her, so she thought maybe that was me. Carlina was actually able to find this same picture on the National Website for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC, and she called them and told them her story. So they took down a description for her, and they were able to narrow down cases based on her age. So then on January 4th of 2011, Joy White got a call from her caseworker letting her know that they had found her daughter. Now, can you even put yourself in her shoes of what that must have felt like? Carlina and Joy actually got to talk on the phone, and she heard her whole family yelling, "Come home, come home." She then contacted NYPD and let them know that she had found her daughter, and then Carlina was able to meet her family for the first time. So word spread that a kidnapping case had been solved 23 years later, a missing infant, and everyone was just so excited about it. I remember when it happened. I was in high school. It was just so cool. And all seems great and happy about this situation, but at the same time, Carlina knows that now everyone knows who committed this crime. Her mother, Anne. So police went to where she lived in North Carolina, and she wasn't there. But on January 23rd of 2011, she actually decided to turn herself in. However, she pleaded not guilty to the charges of kidnapping Carlina. So as you can imagine, Carlina felt extremely torn about the whole situation. I mean, on one hand, she's so happy that she found her real mom and that she's reunited with her family. But on the other hand, she loved Anne, and she felt guilty that she was facing jail time because of her finding her real mom and finding out the truth. Carlina doesn't actually want Anne to be in jail, but Joy definitely does. I mean, it was her daughter that was kidnapped, and this has definitely caused some strain in their relationship. Not only that, Joy actually found out that Carlina was abused by Anne at some points, and this just infuriated Joy and made her hate Anne even more. anymore, as you can imagine. But Carlina made it clear that she was always gonna have a relationship with her mom. This is the person who raised her. She was a huge part of her life, whether they like it or not. But her new adopted family like really had trouble with this. And I mean, it makes sense. She stole her baby. Why would you be cool with her? Carlina didn't have another meeting with her family. Their biological family kind of grew apart, and she started going by the name Nettie again. She decided that this was the name that she felt most comfortable with. She felt like she had given it to herself because it was a nickname she came up with. And as of right now, she says she has no regrets about what happened. Naturally, she's just happy and relieved to know the truth. But Anne did finally plead guilty, and on July 30th, 2012, Anne was sentenced to 12 years in prison. But that's it for me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.